Imagine you're a Portuguese naval officer in 1809. You have warships, you have cannons, you have trained soldiers and the full backing of the Portuguese Empire. Your mission is simple: destroy the Red Flag Fleet. You've heard the stories. You know who runs it. A former sex worker from Canton who took over her dead husband's pirate operation and turned it into the most dominant naval force in Chinese history. You're not worried. You have the firepower. You have professional military training. She's a pirate. How hard could this be? You're about to get completely destroyed. And you're about to understand why Ching Shih controlled the South China Sea for years, and why no navy on Earth could stop her. Welcome to the story of Ching Shih, the most successful pirate in history. Not one of the most successful. The most. More powerful than Blackbeard. More organized than any European pirate fleet. She commanded over 1,800 ships and somewhere between 80,000 and 180,000 men at her peak. That's not a pirate operation. That's a navy. A private, self-funded, unbeatable navy. And she built it from nothing. No inheritance, no royal backing, no army handed to her. Just intelligence, discipline, and the ability to outthink every single opponent she's ever faced. To put this in perspective, the Portuguese Navy in the early 1800s was one of the most advanced in the world. They had global reach, they had technology, they had centuries of naval warfare experience. Yet when they showed up in the South China Sea to stop Ching Shih, they were operating in her waters, against her rules, with no supply lines, no local knowledge, and no advantage. The British East India Company, which controlled trade across the Indian Ocean and had resources that rivaled many nations, faced that same problem. They were powerful everywhere except where it mattered. Ching Shih was powerful exactly where it mattered. That's the difference between theoretical and actual power. She understood this instinctively. Every admiral who faced her learned it the hard way. Canton, China, late 1700s. Ching Shih is born into poverty. The exact year is unclear. Historians estimate around 1775. Her real name is lost. Ching Shih just means widow of Ching. That's how little anyone cared about recording her life before she became terrifying. She works on a floating brothel in Canton Harbor. These weren't unusual. The Pearl River had entire communities of people living on boats, working, trading, surviving. She's sharp. She watches how power moves. She watches how money moves. And she remembers everything she sees. Life on the Pearl River in the late 1700s was complex. The floating communities weren't lawless. They were organized with their own hierarchies and territories. The brothels were businesses, sometimes run by women with significant influence. Ching Shih learned how to navigate these systems from childhood. She watched women negotiate with merchants. She watched men fight over territory and reputation. She learned how to read people, how to understand what they wanted, and how to give it to them in a way that created loyalty. These skills, learned in the cramped quarters of a floating brothel, would eventually allow her to command hundreds of thousands of men across vast stretches of ocean. The connection between where she started and what she became isn't obvious at first, but it's there in every decision she made later. Every negotiation, every law she wrote, every alliance she formed came from understanding human nature in its most raw, desperate forms. In 1801, she marries Zheng Yi. He's already a feared pirate captain, already running a serious operation in the South China Sea. The marriage isn't romantic, it's a negotiation. She agrees to marry him on one condition: equal say in running the fleet. He agrees, and she means it. From the start, she's not just his wife. She's the co-commander. She learns the routes, alliances, rivalries, money. She absorbs the entire operation from the inside. When Zheng Yi looks at the fleet, he sees what he built. When Ching Shih looks at it, she sees what it could become. This partnership was unusual for its time. Female involvement in piracy wasn't unknown, but female command authority was extraordinary. Historical records show that she participated in strategic planning from the very beginning. She didn't simply support her husband's decisions, she made them alongside him. When Zheng Yi wanted to expand, she analyzed the risks. When other pirate captains wanted to join the confederation he was building, she assessed whether they could be trusted. When merchants negotiated for safe passage, sometimes Ching Shih herself conducted the negotiations, offering better terms and building relationships that kept trade flowing and tribute money steady. She was learning an empire, not theoretically, but practically. She was learning the actual mechanics of power over water, in a region where power meant the difference between wealth and starvation. Zheng Yi dies in 1807, a typhoon, most accounts say. He's gone, and suddenly the fleet is leaderless. This is the moment most women in her position disappear from history, replaced, pushed aside, forgotten. Ching Shih does the opposite. She consolidates power immediately. She secures the loyalty of Zheng Yi's adopted son, a man named Chang Pao. He becomes her military commander in the field. She runs the whole operation herself. No transition period, no hesitation. She just takes control and gets to work. She doesn't just maintain what her husband built, she expands it. She organizes the entire Red Flag fleet under a strict written code of laws. Real laws. Enforced laws. If you robbed a village that had already paid tribute, you were punished. If you raped a captured woman, you were executed. If you deserted, your ears were cut off and you were paraded through the street as a warning. These weren't suggestions. She meant every word. And the fleet followed them. Because a pirate operation with no rules falls apart fast. She understood that. Her male rivals never did. Her legal code was remarkably sophisticated for an era when most navies operated on informal customs and the whims of individual commanders. She codified everything. How much plunder each rank received, what happened to wounded sailors, how widows of dead crew members were compensated, whether captains could punish soldiers without approval from higher command. These weren't arbitrary rules written in anger. They were carefully constructed policies designed to make the fleet operate more efficiently than any legitimate military at the time. She understood that men would follow rules they perceived to be fair. She understood that consistency bred loyalty. She understood that a pirate who lost an ear for desertion might reconsider, but he would also tell every other pirate what happened, and that story would spread through the fleet like a warning that worked better than any written decree. Her code wasn't cruel for cruelty's sake. It was cruel for efficiency's sake, and it worked. At her peak, Ching Shih controls 6 color-coded fleets. Each has a commander, a territory, and a quota. They pay taxes back to her. She runs it like a government. She negotiates directly with coastal villages, offering protection in exchange for regular payment. If you paid, you were safe. If you didn't, you learned quickly why that was a mistake. Merchants along the South China Sea had 2 choices: pay Ching Shih or don't sail. Most paid. It was cheaper than the alternative, and everyone along that coastline knew it. The organizational structure she created was the first time anyone had successfully unified pirate operations across such a vast territory. Before her, pirate captains were independent operators who occasionally coordinated on major targets. She changed that. She created a centralized system with clear reporting structures, defined territories, and regular revenue streams. Each colored fleet controlled a specific stretch of coast. The Red Flag Fleet was her personal navy, and the most powerful and most directly under her control. The other colors had autonomy, but they answered to her. If a captain ordering under the blue flag wanted to attack a merchant vessel, he needed to check whether that vessel had already paid tribute to the red flag. If it had, the attack was forbidden. These rules prevented internal conflict and eliminated double taxation that would have driven merchants away from the South China Sea entirely. Her genius was understanding that a sustainable protection racket required consistency and restraint. The Chinese government tries to stop her multiple times. They send warships. She destroys them. In 1808, a government fleet attacks her. She captures 63 government vessels and recruits the sailors into her own fleet. Think about that. She doesn't just beat the navy sent to destroy her. She absorbs it. She takes their ships, their men, their resources, and she gets bigger. The government is essentially funding her operation every time they send someone after her. Every failed attack makes her stronger. This pattern repeated itself so consistently that it eventually demoralized the Chinese military establishment. Admirals began requesting transfers rather than face the red flag fleet. Some of them understood what was happening. Ching Shih was using the government's own resources against them. Every ship they built, she might capture. Every sailor they trained, she might recruit. Every strategy they attempted, she had already anticipated because she understood Chinese naval doctrine as well as any educated officer, possibly better. The government was paying to make her stronger. Meanwhile, she was offering the soldiers who fought her a choice: be captured and executed, or surrender and join a fleet that actually paid regularly, had clear rules, and offered promotion based on merit rather than connections to Beijing. So China asks for help. They approach the Portuguese. They approach the British East India Company. They want colonial warships, professional sailors, and heavy cannons brought in to do what the Chinese Navy couldn't. Portugal sends a fleet. Britain sends ships. The combined force moves against her. She fights them off. The Portuguese retreat. She captures some of their vessels too. At this point, Ching Shih has fought 3 separate naval powers: China, Portugal, Britain. She beats all of them. None of them can touch her. You have to understand how extraordinary this is. Pirates in this era usually lasted a few years. Blackbeard operated for roughly 2 years before he was killed. Most pirates were hunted down and executed within a decade. Ching Shih operates for years and doesn't lose. She doesn't get caught. She doesn't get betrayed from within. She doesn't make the one mistake that ends her. The only explanation is that she's a better strategist than anyone they send against her. She knows the waters, the politics, the tides of loyalty. She always knows more than the people trying to destroy her. Her advantage against the Portuguese and British forces was partly tactical and partly psychological. When European warships arrived, they were operating at the end of extremely long supply lines. They couldn't stay in the South China Sea indefinitely. They had to return to port eventually. Ching Shih's fleet lived in the South China Sea. These were their waters. They could withdraw into narrow channels and hidden anchorages that the European ships couldn't navigate with their deeper drafts and larger turning radiuses. But beyond the tactical advantages, there was also a morale factor. The Portuguese and British sailors often didn't understand why they were fighting these particular pirates. They were paid soldiers following orders from distant capitals. Ching Shih's sailors, meanwhile, understood exactly why they were fighting. They fought to protect their territory, their leader, their regular salaries, and their way of life. The European forces were operating on abstract orders. Ching Shih's forces were defending their home. That difference matters in combat. By 1810, the Chinese government is exhausted. They've spent enormous resources. They've lost ships. They've lost face. Ching Shih is still out there, still operating, still completely untouchable. So, they do something remarkable. They offer her a deal. Not an arrest, not a demand for unconditional surrender, a negotiation. She meets with the Governor General of Canton herself, in person. She walks in and she talks her way into one of the most favorable pirate surrenders in recorded history. The negotiation itself reveals her diplomatic sophistication. She didn't approach it from a position of desperation, even though the government was desperate to end the situation. She approached it from a position of strength. She had demands. She knew what she could and couldn't hold on to. She understood the political pressures facing the Governor General back in Beijing. The Chinese government was fighting wars on multiple fronts. They were dealing with internal rebellions and external threats. They couldn't afford to keep fighting an unwinnable naval war in the South China Sea indefinitely. Ching Shih understood all of this. She knew how to read power dynamics between rival factions in the Chinese government. She knew that some officials wanted to eliminate her, while others just wanted her to stop being their problem. She navigated these rivalries with precision. Here's what she gets. Most of her fleet keeps their ships. Her sailors keep their loot. Chang Pao gets appointed as an official in the Chinese military. Ching Shih herself retires freely, keeps her fortune, and opens a gambling house in Canton. She walks away rich and entirely free. The government tells the public she surrendered. But look at the terms she secured. She won. She negotiated a retirement package that most legitimate military commanders would envy. No pirate in history ever retired that well. She cashed out at exactly the right moment, and the government thanked her for it. The settlement she negotiated included specific protections for her supporters and family members. Everyone involved in her operation received amnesty. No one was executed. No one was punished. In exchange, she promised that her forces wouldn't raid along the Chinese coast anymore. It was a mutual agreement that benefited both parties. The Chinese government got peace and didn't have to admit they'd been defeated. Ching Shih got wealth, safety, and the freedom to disappear from the life of piracy on her own terms. Every pirate who came before her had either died violently or been captured and executed. She simply decided to stop being a pirate and was allowed to do so. That alone proves something about her intelligence and her position. She recognized the moment when continuing would become a liability rather than an asset, and she had the authority to make the transition happen. She lives the rest of her life in Canton. She runs her gambling house. She raises a family. By every account, she's comfortable, respected, and entirely free. She dies in 1844 at around age 69. Old age, in her own home, with her fortune intact. Every admiral and governor who tried to destroy her was already dead, disgraced, or forgotten by then. She outlasted all of them. Every single one. Most history books barely mention Ching Shih. The ones that do often struggle to categorize her. She's not a queen in the traditional sense, not a general, not a revolutionary. She's just a woman who was better at running a naval empire than any of the men around her. Better than the pirates, better than the admirals, better than the colonial powers. She looked at the South China Sea in the early 1800s and she decided it was hers. And then, it was. Chang Pao, the man who commanded her fleets in battle, the man she eventually married after Zhang Yi's death, sometimes gets described as the real power behind the operation. The historical record doesn't support that. She set the laws, she negotiated the surrender, she kept the fortune. He followed her lead. The people who want to hand him credit are the same people who couldn't accept that a woman ran the most powerful pirate fleet in history. But the evidence is clear. It was always her. She built it. She ran it. She walked away with it. She did it all on her own terms. From the floating brothel in Canton Harbor to the gambling house where she died, a wealthy and untouchable woman.